Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hui Podcast. Let's turn back the clock to the smoke-filled years of World War II. During that era of relentless warfare, the German army stood out with its distinctive combat style. Their Blitzkrieg tactics became legendary, sweeping through battlefields with unparalleled speed and efficiency. In the early stages of the war, their tanks and dive bombers sent shockwaves across the European continent. Many immediately associate Blitzkrieg with the famed military strategist Heinz Guderian, often hailed as the father of Germany's armored forces. His forward-thinking reforms and the establishment of German panzer divisions played a crucial role in shaping this doctrine. However, the roots of Blitzkrieg can actually be traced back to the final months of World War I in 1918. It's well known that trench warfare dominated land battles during World War I. Yet, in the spring of 1918, the German army launched an offensive on the Western Front that, to some extent, broke this conventional mold. While this offensive ultimately failed to change Germany's fate in the war, it planted the seeds for the tactics that would later evolve into Blitzkrieg. Today, we will take a closer look at that crucial offensive and its significance. By 1918, Germany found itself in an increasingly dire situation. The military had pinned its hopes on unrestricted submarine warfare to cut off Britain's supply lines, but the United States' entry into the war shattered this plan. With America's vast resources now fueling the Allied war effort, the balance tipped dramatically in favor of the Allies, while Germany's manpower and resources were stretched to their limits. If the war continued as a battle of attrition, Germany's defeat seemed inevitable. Despite these grim prospects, German military leaders sought a way out. In 1917, the Russian Empire was rocked by both the February and October revolutions, creating an opportunity for Germany. Sensing that Russia might soon exit the war, Germany intensified its pressure on the Eastern Front. By March 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed, securing a temporary strategic relief for Germany. With Russia withdrawing from the war, a fragile illusion of peace settled over the once violent front. Lands ravaged by conflict were now handed back to an uneasy calm. For Germany, this diplomatic victory brought not only relief, but also territorial gains in the East, providing much-needed resources to sustain its war machine. Now able to redeploy troops from the Eastern Front to the West, Germany was in a position to launch a major offensive against the French and British lines. In the short term, this shift granted the German army a numerical advantage on the Western Front, putting immense pressure on Allied defenses. The Allied lines, already battered by years of war, now faced an overwhelming onslaught from the reinforced German divisions. While American troops had begun arriving in Europe, their combat experience was limited compared to the battle-hardened forces of Britain and France. The German High Command quickly recognized this vulnerability and sought to exploit it. Determined to break the deadlock, German strategists devised a bold plan. They aimed to leverage their temporary superiority on the Western Front to force the Allies into negotiating a peace settlement on favorable terms. However, sheer numerical advantage alone would not be enough to guarantee success. The brutal reality of trench warfare, dominated by machine guns and artillery, meant that even a larger force could be ground down in a protracted battle. Germany's confidence rested on a new tactical innovation: stormtrooper infiltration tactics. Years of static trench warfare had rendered traditional infantry charges and prolonged artillery barrages ineffective. Instead of attempting to annihilate enemy troops and artillery outright, this new strategy focused on temporarily suppressing them. To achieve this, concentrated artillery bombardments would target enemy positions, providing cover for specialized infantry units to breach defensive lines and disrupt the enemy's ability to organize a counterattack. In 1918, when both artillery and infantry had mastered advanced techniques to protect themselves, a new weapon emerged to meet an urgent battlefield demand. That weapon was the submachine gun, offering an unparalleled rate of fire at close range, far surpassing traditional rifles. Between late 1917 and early 1918, German forces began equipping their troops with this revolutionary firearm, drastically changing their combat strategy. One pivotal moment in history stands out, one that marked a turning point in warfare. It was that spring when German forces on the Western Front suddenly sprang into action. Armed with a groundbreaking weapon, they introduced the world to the feared stormtroopers, elite infiltration squads wielding the MP-18 submachine gun. The preparations for this offensive were carried out in complete secrecy. In the relatively calm months before the attack, the German army not only gathered its most elite troops, but also stockpiled massive amounts of artillery shells. Fresh from their victories on the Eastern Front, They gained valuable battlefield experience and strategic resources, while the Western Front remained locked in a grueling stalemate. Then, as spring arrived in 1918, German High Command reached a crucial decision. They would apply the infiltration tactics that had proven successful in the East to the Western Front. These tactics had been pioneered by General Oskar von Hutier, whose bold battlefield maneuvers yielded significant success. As a result, this approach would later be named the Hutier Tactics. The lessons of Verdun still loomed large in the minds of the Allies. The British and French forces never anticipated that the Germans would launch a major offensive at this moment, let alone one of such ferocity and precision. The sudden and devastating German artillery barrage caught them completely off guard, leaving them with little chance to mount an effective counterattack. German artillery commanders had meticulously planned the assault, targeting the most critical positions, command centers, communication hubs, artillery placements, and infantry strongholds. As soon as the German guns roared to life, the stage was set. Their shells rained down like an unrelenting storm, each strike calculated with precision based on thorough reconnaissance. The Allied defensive lines began to buckle under the pressure. Amid the chaos and confusion, German stormtroopers surged forward, their MP-18 submachine guns unleashing a deadly hail of bullets. Their firepower was overwhelming and precise, tearing through enemy defenses with brutal efficiency. The distinct crackle of the submachine gun became the defining sound of that fateful spring, a grim symphony of war that signified a new era in battlefield tactics. Historians have since studied these rapid and effective maneuvers in great detail. The infiltration tactics and stormtrooper operations marked a significant milestone in military strategy, forever changing the way battles were fought. The MP-18 submachine gun, an icon of its time, became permanently etched in the annals of warfare. Amid the tide of history, one battle remains a gripping tale of strategy, desperation, and sacrifice: the brutal clash between German forces and the British-French Allied armies on the Western Front in 1918. It was a battlefield where technology and tactics converged in a spectacle of violence. German troops not only carried submachine guns but also wore rudimentary body armor and deployed flamethrowers to devastating effect. In the brutal close-quarters combat that followed, they proved nearly unstoppable, overrunning Allied positions like sandcastles swept away by the tide. Soon, key locations like Calais and Dunkirk became the focal points of their advance. By early April, the Germans launched a second wave of attacks with relentless aggression. This assault pushed the British and French forces to the brink. Some troops found themselves driven to the coastline, trapped with the sea at their backs, and no escape in sight. Faced with imminent disaster, the British Expeditionary Forces commander issued a desperate order: hold the line at all costs. Surrender was not an option. At that moment, the situation for the Allies was nothing short of dire. Each German assault seemed to gain more ground, threatening to turn the tide of the war in their favor. However, these hard-fought victories came at an immense cost. The elite stormtroopers, though highly effective, suffered devastating casualties. Their losses dealt a heavy blow to German morale and future combat effectiveness. What was even more alarming was the fact that, despite their early successes, the German army lacked a coherent strategy to capitalize on these breakthroughs. Within the High Command, there was no clear consensus on how to systematically apply infiltration tactics on a larger scale. Erich Ludendorff, one of Germany's top military leaders, even instructed his subordinates to halt their advance once a breach in the enemy lines had been made, failing to press the advantage further. Moreover, once the stormtroopers punched through Allied defenses, German forces struggled to consolidate their gains. The logistical challenges of supplying advancing troops quickly became insurmountable. At that time, only mechanized transport could meet the demands of such a fast-moving offensive, yet Germany lacked the necessary resources. As a result, despite achieving multiple breakthroughs, the Germans were unable to hold their positions. Time and again, isolated stormtrooper units found themselves cut off and eventually encircled by counterattacking Allied forces. By the summer of 1918, with the heavy losses of elite stormtroopers, the German offensive finally lost momentum. The battle concluded with the Germans retreating, giving the exhausted British and French forces a much-needed respite. In the whirlwind of war, Germany in 1918 resembled a cornered beast, making one last desperate struggle. That spring offensive had been a violent storm, one final gamble to overturn the course of history. Yet, in the end, it failed to change the outcome. The German offensive was like a stone cast into a lake, creating ripples that spread outward, only to fade into stillness. The British and French forces did not falter. Instead, they launched a powerful counterattack, the 100 Days Offensive. With the support of French Renault tanks, Allied forces surged forward like an unstoppable tide, reclaiming lost ground step by step. By this point, the German High Command finally realized the inevitable. The war was lost. Soon after, the Kaiser abdicated, the war ended, and this chapter of history came to a close. From a military perspective, the German Spring Offensive of 1918, though ultimately unsuccessful, introduced concepts of concentrated firepower and rapid maneuver that would later be refined by military strategists. Among them was Heinz Guderian. Time moved forward, and with the outbreak of World War II, the German army once again took on the role of a rapid strike force. But this time, it was no longer flesh-and-blood soldiers leading the charge. It was steel-clad tanks. These machines, with roaring engines as their hearts, stormed the battlefields with relentless force. Their accompanying infantry, now mechanized, moved swiftly in half-tracked armored vehicles, adapting seamlessly to the new era of warfare. What the German army had failed to achieve in 1918 was accomplished in mere days in 1940. This was undeniable proof that Blitzkrieg was born from the foundation laid by World War I's German stormtroopers, now merged with the technological advancements of a new age. Ultimately, warfare always converges with politics. In World War I, Germany sought to use tactical and technological superiority to gain the upper hand and force an end to the conflict. But this was wishful thinking. It overlooked the broader geopolitical landscape. The same mistake was repeated in World War II. Despite Nazi Germany's near-total domination of Europe through Blitzkrieg, it ultimately provoked global resistance, sealing its downfall. As the legendary strategist Karl von Clausewitz once said, "War is the continuation of politics by other means." A glance at Germany's fate in both world wars is enough to prove the wisdom of this statement. And with that, our story comes to an end. In the fading echoes of history, the German Kaiser's offensive remains a defining moment, a time when every decision had the power to reshape the world. His campaign was a double-edged sword, embodying both Germany's ambition and the brutal reality of war's destruction. At that moment in history, Kaiser Wilhelm II played the role of a grand strategist, orchestrating an offensive that shocked the world. He firmly believed that only through overwhelming force could Germany defeat its powerful enemies. And so, he commanded his armies to launch an all-out assault, hoping to crush France and break Britain's blockade in one decisive stroke. Yet history marched forward, and the Kaiser's ambitions were not realized as he had hoped. Though the German army achieved several battlefield victories, they came at an immense cost. War's cruelty shattered countless families and claimed an unthinkable number of lives. In the end, the Kaiser's offensive ended in failure. The war drained Germany's strength and shook the very foundations of his rule. This campaign became a lasting footnote in the history of World War I, forever remembered as both a bold attempt and a tragic miscalculation. And that is our story for today, the tale of the Kaiser's offensive during World War I. I hope this story has given you a deeper understanding of that pivotal moment in history and a greater appreciation for the peace we enjoy today. That's all for now. Until next time, thank you all for listening.